And Cornwallis's solution to it was to order his artillery to open on the whole mass with grape shot. It flew in among them, killing and wounding both sides, but breaking up the attack and giving the British time to recover. A ruthless way of treating the situation, but one that worked.
At the end of the battle, Cornwallis had possession of the field, but a quarter of his men were killed, wounded, or missing. Greene had accomplished his goal. His army had survived.
Lord Cornwallis has conquered his troops out of shoes and provisions, and himself out of troops. Horace Walpole.
Cornwallis now virtually abandoned the Carolinas to Greene, who set upon a systematic strategy of winning those states back from the British. The English commander marched towards his supply base in Wilmington, North Carolina. That march would continue to Virginia, eventually taking him to a camp on the Yorktown Peninsula, and a siege that would change the course of history. French General Comte de Rochambeau was not impressed with his allies when he sailed into Newport, Rhode Island, with over 5,000 French troops in July of 1780. After just 5 days in America, he wrote,
"Send us troops, ships, and money, but do not count on these people, nor on their resources. They have neither money nor credit. Their forces only exist momentarily." Comte de Rochambeau.
In spite of heroic efforts by financier Robert Morris, the American cause was on the verge of economic collapse. In a country that would not have its first bank until 1781, the citizens put little faith in continental dollars backed by the promises of Congress. In the spring of 1781, Washington knew how desperate his situation was.
If France delays timely aid now, it will avail us nothing if she attempts it hereafter. We are at the end of our tether, and now or never, our deliverance must come. George Washington, late spring, 1781.
Times were desperate for France, too. She had been financing her own participation in the war and also providing the Americans with huge sums of money.
They couldn't pay the debts stemming from their participation in the American Revolution, which cost over £1 billion French pounds and the equivalent of several years' worth of total income of the French monarchy. In fact, the French government was approaching bankruptcy, and 1781 was the last roll of the dice.
After his disastrous battles against Morgan and Greene in the Carolinas, Cornwallis found new opportunities in Virginia.
Virginia was practically defenseless. They had lost their enthusiasm for the war in many respects. This was a huge state, 700,000 people in Virginia, and this little British army was just marching up and down the state at will.
Cornwallis received support in Virginia from the newest British general, Benedict Arnold.
Arnold, for some time, led forces in the Virginia area. He would go into an area, destroy supplies, get at the militia, try to bring the area back under British control.
The British had made Arnold a brigadier general, but he was unsuccessful in attracting enough deserters and loyalists to complete his legion. After some months in Virginia, Arnold led a raid on the area in which he was born and raised. He burned familiar New London, Connecticut to the ground. Near West Point, Allied generals Washington and Rochambeau discussed battle plans. Washington wanted to attack Clinton's army in New York, but Rochambeau had another idea: take Cornwallis on Virginia's Yorktown Peninsula.
But Washington said, but what's the point? The British fleet will come down and take them away. Rochambeau said, Not if the French fleet comes up from the West Indies and bottles them up.
For the first time in the long war, Washington saw the opportunity to use naval superiority to his advantage. They sent a message by frigate to Admiral de Grasse in the West Indies. Acting autonomously, he made one of the most momentous decisions of the war.
He decided he would take a gamble and come up, even though it was a hurricane season. He could spare them 6 weeks, that's it.
Washington arranged for the transport of all troops to Virginia. He tricked Clinton into believing the Allies were heading towards his forces in New York, thus rendering him and his huge army inactive. In South Carolina, Nathanael Greene could take great satisfaction when he learned Washington was coming to Virginia for Cornwallis.
We have been beating the bush, and the general has come to catch the bird. Nathanael Greene.
Not far from the Yorktown Peninsula, de Grasse met a British fleet on the open ocean off Chesapeake Bay in the battle that won for the Allies their needed naval superiority.
Washington marched down to Virginia, and bingo, the French fleet showed up, and they had Cornwallis in this beautiful little box at the end of the peninsula.
I caught sight of General Washington waving his hat at me with demonstrative gestures of the greatest joy. When I rode up to him, he explained that he had just received a dispatch informing him that de Grasse had arrived. Comte de Rochambeau.
Infantryman Joseph Plum Martin, now a sergeant after 5 years in the Continental Army, was one of over 16,000 Allied troops to enter Williamsburg, Virginia, in anticipation of the great siege to come.
We prepared to move down and pay our old acquaintance the British at Yorktown a visit. I doubt not, but their wish was not to have so many of us come at once, as their accommodations were rather scanty. They thought the fewer the better the cheer. We thought the more the merrier. Joseph Plum Martin.
The Allies started from Williamsburg before dawn on September 28th. By dark, they had surrounded the British at a comfortable mile's distance. 52 gigantic French siege guns would be devastatingly effective at that range. On the 10th of October, the Allies opened fire.
The enemy threw bombs. 100, 150, 200 pounders. We could find no refuge in or out of town. The people fled to the waterside and hid in hastily contrived shelters on the banks. But many of them were killed by bursting bombs and their houses destroyed. For the enemy fired in one day 3,600 shot from their heavy guns and batteries. Stefan Popp, German mercenary at Yorktown.
On the night of October 14th, the Allies assaulted 2 strategic British redoubts. Alexander Hamilton, who had been Washington's secretary and trusted aide, commanded one of the attacking parties. Joseph Plum Martin was with him.
We were now in a place where many of our large shells had burst in the ground, making holes sufficient to bury an oxen. A man at my side received a ball in his head and fell under my feet, crying out bitterly. The fort was taken in all quiet in a very short time. Joseph Plum Martin.
With the capture of the 2 redoubts, the Allies moved to within 300 yards of the main British encampments. Cornwallis knew the end had come.
Every American and French gun was blasting away at the British fortifications, and suddenly, up on top of one of the British parapets, mounted a little drummer boy, and he started beating on his drum. And then suddenly, beside the little drummer boy stood a British officer waving a white flag. and they climbed down from the parapet, and they started walking across the battlefield